The morning sun cast long shadows across Camp Pendleton's shooting range as Staff Sergeant Maria Santos adjusted her rifle strap and walked toward the firing line. 23 years old, with steady hands and sharper eyes, she had earned her place among the Marine Corps' elite marksmen through countless hours of practice and an unwavering dedication that had surprised even her toughest instructors. Her dark hair was pulled back in regulation style, and her uniform bore the crisp lines of someone who took pride in every detail of military service. Maria had grown up in a small Texas town where her father taught her to shoot tin cans off fence posts behind their modest house. Those early lessons with an old hunting rifle had sparked something inside her that she couldn't quite explain. While other girls her age were interested in shopping or dating, Maria found peace in the careful breathing, the precise aim, and the satisfying ping of metal hitting its target. When she turned 18, joining the Marines felt like the natural next step. Boot camp had been challenging, but not in the way she expected. The physical training pushed her limits, but she discovered reserves of strength she didn't know existed. The mental discipline required came naturally to her. What proved most difficult was gaining the respect of fellow Marines who seemed to view her presence as some kind of social experiment. Comments whispered behind her back suggested that women belonged in administrative roles, not on the front lines with weapons in their hands. Lieutenant James Morrison watched from a distance as Maria performed her morning equipment check. At 31, he had served 2 tours overseas and held traditional views about women in combat roles. His square jaw and perpetually serious expression had earned him a reputation as a demanding officer who pushed his Marines hard. Morrison believed that the modern military's push for gender integration compromised unit effectiveness and put lives at risk. In his mind, war was no place for political correctness. The day's training exercise was designed to test advanced marksmanship skills under pressure. 47 targets had been positioned at various distances and angles throughout the range, some partially concealed behind barriers, others moving on mechanical systems. Marines would have one opportunity to engage all targets within a specified time limit. Performance on this exercise would determine who qualified for specialized sniper training programs that could define the trajectory of a military career. Morrison had been planning something for weeks. He believed that female Marines needed to understand their limitations before they endangered themselves and others in real combat situations. In his view, this wasn't cruelty but necessary education. The military wasn't a place for feelings or accommodation. Either someone could perform under pressure, or they couldn't. Maria noticed several other Marines glancing in her direction as she prepared her gear. Corporal Mike Chen, a fellow marksman from California, offered an encouraging nod. Chen had become something of an ally over the past months, treating Maria with the same professional respect he showed everyone else. His support meant more than he probably realized, especially when other Marines made it clear they questioned her presence. Santos, front and center, Lieutenant Morrison called out, his voice carrying across the range with unmistakable authority. Maria jogged over and stood at attention. Yes, sir. Morrison held a rifle in his hands, but something seemed off about the weapon. The stock appeared slightly warped, and the scope mounting looked loose. You'll be using this rifle for today's exercise, he announced loudly enough for nearby Marines to hear. Maria accepted the weapon and immediately noticed problems. The trigger felt wrong when she tested it, and the scope had obvious alignment issues. Any experienced shooter would recognize that this rifle could never achieve the accuracy required for the day's challenging targets. Morrison watched her face carefully, waiting for her to complain or request a different weapon. Sir, this rifle appears to have some mechanical issues, Maria said respectfully, keeping her voice steady despite the growing awareness that this was some kind of test. That's the rifle assigned to you, Marine, Morrison replied with a slight smirk. If you can't handle it, perhaps you should consider requesting a transfer to a more suitable position. Several Marines within earshot chuckled quietly, understanding the implication. Maria felt heat rise in her cheeks but forced herself to maintain composure. She had encountered similar situations throughout her military career, moments when someone decided to test whether she truly belonged or would crack under pressure. Maria examined the rifle more thoroughly, running her hands along its components and testing the action. The bolt stuck slightly when cycling, and the barrel showed signs of damage that would affect bullet trajectory. Most concerning was the scope, which appeared to have been deliberately tampered with. Someone had loosened the mounting rings just enough to make accurate shooting nearly impossible. Is there a problem, Santos? Morrison asked, his tone suggesting he expected her to back down. No problem, sir, Maria replied, surprising him with her calm response. just getting familiar with the weapon. Morrison had expected her to protest further or perhaps even refuse to participate in the exercise. Her acceptance of the defective rifle caught him off guard, but he convinced himself that she simply didn't understand how badly the weapon would perform. When she failed spectacularly in front of everyone, it would prove his point about women in combat roles. Maria spent several more minutes with the rifle, using techniques her father had taught her years ago for dealing with problematic weapons. She learned to anticipate the trigger's irregular pull and estimated how the damaged barrel might affect bullet flight. The scope was essentially useless, so she would have to rely on the rifle's iron sights, which added another layer of difficulty to an already challenging exercise. Other Marines began taking their positions along the firing line, each carrying properly maintained rifles with precision optics. Maria noticed the quality difference immediately but said nothing. Corporal Chen glanced at her weapon and frowned, clearly recognizing that something wasn't right. He started to approach, perhaps to speak with Lieutenant Morrison, but Maria caught his eye and shook her head slightly. "Attention on the firing line," the range safety officer announced. "Today's exercise will test your ability to engage multiple targets under time pressure. You will have 30 minutes to engage all 47 targets positioned throughout the range. Scoring will be based on hits versus misses, with bonus points for center mass strikes. Questions?" Maria raised her hand. "Sir, are we required to use assigned weapons, or can we request alternatives if we identify mechanical problems?" Morrison stepped forward before the range safety officer could respond. "Marines use the equipment they're given, Santos. In combat, you don't get to choose your weapons." The range safety officer looked confused by the exchange but didn't intervene. Maria nodded and turned her attention back to the rifle, making final adjustments to the iron sights and testing the trigger pull one more time. She had no intention of complaining further or giving Morrison the satisfaction of seeing her quit. As Marines took their positions, Maria found herself thinking about her father's lessons from years ago. He had taught her that good shooting was 90% mental preparation and only 10% equipment. "A true marksman adapts to whatever weapon they're given," he used to say while they practiced with his old, temperamental hunting rifle. "The rifle doesn't make the shooter. The shooter makes the rifle work." Morrison positioned himself where he could observe Maria's performance clearly. He expected to see frustration, possibly anger, and, ultimately failure that would justify his beliefs about women in combat roles. Instead, he watched her methodically prepare for the exercise with the same professional focus she always displayed. The range fell silent except for the distant sound of mechanical targets beginning their programmed movements. Maria controlled her breathing and tried to forget about the defective rifle in her hands. This wasn't about the weapon anymore. This was about proving that she belonged here, that her dedication and skill mattered more than anyone's prejudices or attempts at sabotage. "Commence firing," the range safety officer commanded. Maria brought the rifle to her shoulder and acquired her first target through the iron sights. The weapon felt wrong in every way, but she had committed to making it work. Her first shot rang out across the range, followed quickly by the distinctive ping of a successful hit. Morrison's confident expression faltered slightly as he realized she had managed to compensate for the rifle's defects. Maria moved smoothly to the second target, adjusting her aim based on what she had learned from the first shot. The trigger's irregular pull required precise timing, and the damaged barrel meant she had to aim slightly left to compensate for the rifle's tendency to pull shots to the right. Another shot, another hit. By the fifth successful engagement, Morrison's smirk had disappeared entirely. Other Marines on the firing line were struggling with some of the more challenging targets despite having properly functioning weapons, while Maria continued finding her marks with a rifle that should have made accurate shooting impossible. Corporal Chen glanced over during a brief pause and saw Maria's focused expression as she tracked a moving target. He recognized the look of a shooter who had found their rhythm, regardless of the obstacles. Her breathing was controlled, her movements economical, and her concentration absolute. Whatever Lieutenant Morrison had intended with the defective rifle, it wasn't working out as planned. The exercise continued with Maria methodically working through targets at various ranges and positions. Some shots required her to engage moving targets from awkward firing positions. Others demanded precision shooting at extreme distances where the rifle's defects should have made hits impossible. Yet she continued adapting, learning the weapon's quirks, and finding ways to make it perform. Morrison found himself watching Maria more than monitoring the other Marines. Her performance with the sabotaged rifle was beyond what he had thought possible. Each successful hit challenged his assumptions and made him question whether his beliefs about female Marines were based on facts or prejudices he had never examined closely. As the exercise reached its midpoint, Maria had engaged 23 targets successfully. Her success rate was actually higher than most Marines using properly maintained weapons. The other shooters began to notice her performance, some pausing between shots to glance in her direction with expressions of amazement and growing respect. The defective rifle had become an extension of Maria's will rather than an obstacle to her performance. She had learned to anticipate its quirks so completely that she could compensate almost instinctively. What Morrison intended as a humiliating lesson had transformed into a demonstration of skill and determination that exceeded everyone's expectations. Maria's father would have been proud watching his daughter adapt to the challenging situation with the same calm competence he had tried to instill during those long afternoons practicing behind their house. The lessons about mental discipline and making any weapon work were serving her well in ways he probably never imagined when he first put a rifle in her hands. The afternoon sun climbed higher as Maria entered the second phase of the shooting exercise, her confidence growing with each successful engagement. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the mild weather, not from heat but from the intense concentration required to make the defective rifle perform. She had now hit 28 of 30 attempted targets, a success rate that would be impressive with any weapon, let alone one that had been deliberately sabotaged. Lieutenant Morrison stood behind the firing line, his arms crossed and his expression increasingly troubled. What had begun as a calculated lesson in limitations had evolved into something he hadn't anticipated. Maria's performance was becoming a spectacle that drew attention from other Marines, range personnel, and even some visiting officers who had stopped to observe the exercise. Colonel Sarah Williams, the base's training commander, had arrived unannounced to review range operations. A veteran of 3 deployments with an exemplary record, Williams commanded respect throughout the base. She noticed the unusual attention focused on one particular Marine and moved closer to investigate. "What's the situation here, Morrison?" Colonel Williams asked, approaching the lieutenant. Morrison straightened to attention. "Ma'am, conducting standard marksmanship evaluation. Staff Sergeant Santos is demonstrating proficiency with assigned equipment." Williams observed Maria for several minutes, watching her steady breathing and methodical approach to each target. Something seemed unusual about the Marine's rifle, but she couldn't identify the specific issue from her position. What impressed her most was the shooter's obvious competence and professional demeanor under what appeared to be challenging circumstances. Maria acquired target number 31, a moving silhouette at 300 meters that required precise timing and lead calculation. The defective scope made range estimation difficult, forcing her to rely on experience and instinct. She controlled her breathing, squeezed the trigger during the natural pause between heartbeats, and watched the target spin as her bullet found its mark. Corporal Chen had finished his own shooting and moved to a position where he could observe Maria's technique more closely. He recognized the signs of a shooter working around equipment problems and began to suspect that something irregular was happening. Chen had served with Maria long enough to know her capabilities with proper equipment, and her current performance suggested she was overcoming significant obstacles. The mechanical target system presented increasingly complex challenges as the exercise progressed. Targets appeared briefly between barriers, moved in unpredictable patterns, or required engagement from awkward positions that tested both marksmanship skills and physical conditioning. Maria adapted to each new challenge, using the defective rifle's limitations as parameters within which to operate rather than excuses for poor performance. Morrison found himself in an uncomfortable position. His intention had been to demonstrate that women couldn't perform under pressure when faced with equipment failures that might occur in combat situations. Instead, Maria's performance was highlighting qualities he valued in Marines: adaptability, determination, and the ability to accomplish missions regardless of circumstances. Target 35 appeared at maximum range, barely visible as a dark shape against the hillside backdrop. Most Marines would struggle with this shot using perfectly maintained rifles and high-quality optics. Maria studied the target through her iron sights, estimated wind conditions by watching vegetation movement, and calculated the bullet drop for the extreme distance. The shot rang out across the range, followed by the delayed confirmation ping that indicated another successful hit. Colonel Williams moved closer to Morrison, her expression showing growing interest in what she was observing. "Lieutenant, what exactly is special about this Marine's performance?" "Nothing special, ma'am," Morrison replied, though his tone lacked conviction. "Just standard training." Williams had spent enough time on firing ranges to recognize exceptional shooting when she saw it. Maria's consistency and apparent ability to engage targets that challenged other Marines suggested either unusual skill or unusual circumstances. The colonel decided to investigate further. Maria paused briefly to wipe sweat from her hands and check her ammunition supply. She had 13 more targets to engage with plenty of time remaining in the exercise window. The defective rifle felt more familiar now, its quirks becoming predictable through repetition and careful observation. What had initially seemed like an insurmountable obstacle was transforming into simply another variable to manage. Other Marines on the firing line began to struggle with the more challenging targets, their earlier confidence giving way to frustration as distances increased and target presentations became more complex. Several missed multiple shots at targets that Maria had engaged successfully with her problematic weapon. The contrast was becoming obvious to everyone present. Sergeant First Class David Martinez, the range's senior instructor, approached Colonel Williams with a concerned expression. Martinez had been observing the exercise from multiple positions and noticed discrepancies that troubled him as a professional. "Colonel, I think you should examine Staff Sergeant Santos's rifle," Martinez said quietly. "Something doesn't look right about her equipment." Williams nodded and moved toward the firing line as Maria prepared for her next shot. The colonel's presence caused some distraction among the Marines, but Maria remained focused on her targets. She had learned early in her military career that performing well was the best response to any situation, regardless of who might be watching. Target 38 was a partially concealed silhouette that appeared for only 5 seconds before disappearing again. Maria had observed its pattern during previous cycles and timed her shot for the moment of maximum exposure. The bullet struck the target cleanly, causing several nearby Marines to pause their own shooting to watch her performance. Morrison realized that his plan was backfiring spectacularly. Instead of proving that women couldn't handle combat pressures, Maria's performance was demonstrating exactly the kind of competence and adaptability that the Marine Corps valued most. Worse, her success with deliberately sabotaged equipment was making other Marines look inadequate by comparison. Colonel Williams reached the firing line during a brief ceasefire period as Marines adjusted positions for the final targets. She approached Maria directly, something that caused visible tension among the other participants. "Staff Sergeant Santos, may I examine your rifle?" Williams requested. Maria immediately stood and handed over the weapon with proper military courtesy. "Yes, ma'am." Williams inspected the rifle carefully, her experienced eyes immediately identifying the loose scope mounts, damaged barrel, and irregular trigger mechanism. Her expression darkened as she realized the extent of the weapon's defects. No Marine should have been required to use equipment in this condition for any training exercise. "Sergeant Martinez, look at this rifle," Williams called to the range instructor. Martinez examined the weapon and shook his head with obvious displeasure. "Ma'am, this rifle is completely unserviceable. The scope mounts are loose, the trigger mechanism is damaged, and there's barrel damage that would affect accuracy significantly. This weapon should have been turned in for repair or replacement." Williams turned to Morrison with a stern expression. "Lieutenant, how did this Marine end up with an unserviceable weapon for a qualification exercise?" Morrison felt trapped by circumstances he had created. "Ma'am, equipment was assigned according to standard procedures." "Standard procedures require functional weapons, Lieutenant," Williams replied coldly. "Sergeant Martinez, what's Staff Sergeant Santos's performance been with this defective rifle?" Martinez consulted his scorecard with amazement. "Ma'am, she's engaged 38 targets successfully out of 39 attempts. That's a 97% hit rate with a weapon that shouldn't be capable of accurate shooting." Williams looked at Maria with new understanding and respect. "Staff Sergeant, are you aware that your rifle is unserviceable?" "Yes, ma'am," Maria replied calmly. "I identified several mechanical problems during initial inspection." "Why didn't you request a replacement weapon?" "Ma'am, I was told to use the assigned equipment regardless of condition." Williams turned back to Morrison, her disapproval now obvious. "Lieutenant, we need to discuss proper equipment management after this exercise concludes." The remaining Marines watched this exchange with growing awareness that something significant was happening beyond a simple training exercise. Maria's performance with defective equipment was impressive enough, but the officer-level attention it was drawing suggested broader implications. Maria resumed her position as the exercise entered its final phase. 8 targets remained, including some of the most challenging presentations of the day. The pressure had shifted from proving herself to maintaining her exceptional performance under increased scrutiny. Colonel Williams and several other senior personnel were now observing her every shot. Target 40 engaged Maria from an unexpected angle, requiring her to adjust her firing position quickly while compensating for the rifle's known defects. She dropped into a supported kneeling position, acquired the target through iron sights, and delivered another successful hit. The mechanical ping seemed louder in the unusual quiet that had settled over the range. Morrison watched Maria's continued success with growing apprehension. His attempt to humble a female Marine had instead highlighted her exceptional capabilities while potentially exposing him to disciplinary action for providing defective equipment. The situation had spiraled completely beyond his control. With 4 targets remaining, Maria had achieved a success rate that exceeded most Marines using proper equipment. Her performance was becoming legendary among the observers, a demonstration of skill and determination that would be discussed in training circles for years to come. The defective rifle had transformed from an intended obstacle into the foundation for an inspiring display of professional competence. The final 4 targets represented the most challenging shots of the entire exercise, designed to push even expert marksmen to their limits with perfect equipment. Maria approached these last engagements knowing that dozens of eyes were focused on her performance, including senior officers whose opinions could shape her military career. The defective rifle in her hands had become both burden and badge of honor, proof that determination could overcome deliberate sabotage. Colonel Williams positioned herself where she could observe Maria's technique closely while maintaining a clear view of the target area. The colonel had seen thousands of Marines shoot over her career, but this young woman's performance with obviously defective equipment was unlike anything she had witnessed before. Williams found herself hoping Maria would maintain her exceptional accuracy through the final shots. Target 44 appeared at extreme range through a narrow gap between barriers, visible for only seconds before mechanical systems moved it out of sight. The shot required perfect timing, precise range estimation without functional optics, and compensation for both wind conditions and the rifle's known defects. Maria studied the target's pattern through 2 full cycles, calculating the exact moment when conditions would align for a successful engagement. Lieutenant Morrison stood rigid with growing anxiety as he realized the full implications of what was happening. If Maria completed the exercise with her current success rate, her performance would become part of official training records. Questions would inevitably arise about how she obtained such exceptional results with obviously defective equipment, leading to investigations that could expose his deliberate sabotage. Maria controlled her breathing and settled into a stable firing position as Target 44 began another cycle. She had learned the rifle's quirks so completely that compensating for its defects had become instinctive. The loose scope mounts, irregular trigger pull, and damaged barrel were simply parameters to work within rather than obstacles to overcome. Her father's old lessons about adapting to any weapon had prepared her for exactly this situation. The shot rang out across the range at precisely the calculated moment. Seconds passed in tense silence before the confirmation ping echoed back from the distant hillside. Target 44 had been successfully engaged, bringing Maria's total to 43 successful hits out of 44 attempts. Sergeant Martinez shook his head in amazement as he updated his scorecard. 20-year veterans with perfect equipment rarely achieved such consistency on this particular exercise. Watching a young Marine accomplish it with a sabotaged rifle challenged everything he thought he knew about marksmanship fundamentals. Corporal Chan felt a surge of pride watching his fellow Marine excel under impossible circumstances. He had suspected from the beginning that something irregular was happening with Maria's equipment, but her response had been nothing short of inspirational. Chen made a mental note to share this story with other Marines who questioned whether women belonged in combat roles. Target 45 presented a different challenge entirely. Instead of requiring long-range precision, it demanded rapid engagement of multiple moving silhouettes that appeared simultaneously from different positions. Marines typically used high-capacity magazines and reliable semi-automatic fire for this portion of the exercise. Maria's defective rifle made rapid follow-up shots extremely difficult due to the sticky bolt action and unpredictable trigger mechanism. Maria approached this challenge methodically, prioritizing targets based on their movement patterns and choosing engagement opportunities that would maximize her success rate despite the rifle's limitations. She couldn't rely on rapid fire, so each shot needed to count perfectly. The first silhouette fell to a well-placed round, followed quickly by the second as she worked the bolt action with practiced efficiency. Colonel Williams found herself holding her breath as Maria engaged the multiple targets. The young Marine's tactical thinking impressed the colonel almost as much as her marksmanship skills. Instead of fighting the defective rifle's limitations, Maria was using them to develop creative solutions that demonstrated advanced understanding of weapon capabilities and engagement principles. The third silhouette in the sequence required an awkward shooting position that tested both flexibility and strength. Maria dropped into a prone position and used her non-firing hand to steady the rifle's loose stock while acquiring the target. The shot placement was perfect, striking the silhouette center mass despite the challenging angle and equipment problems. Morrison watched Maria's continued success with increasing desperation. His carefully planned lesson in female limitations had transformed into a demonstration of exactly the kind of competence and adaptability that earned Marines respect and promotion opportunities. Worse, his role in providing defective equipment was becoming more obvious with each successful shot. The final target of the 45 sequence appeared briefly between concrete barriers at medium range. Maria had one chance to engage before it disappeared, and missing would break the remarkable streak she had maintained throughout the exercise. She aligned the iron sights, controlled her breathing, and squeezed the trigger during the natural pause between heartbeats. The bullet struck home with satisfying precision. Target 46 tested pure marksmanship fundamentals at maximum range. A standard silhouette appeared on the distant hillside without movement or concealment, challenging Marines to achieve precision at the limits of their rifle's effective range. With perfect equipment, this shot separated good Marines from exceptional ones. With Maria's sabotaged rifle, it should have been impossible. Maria studied the distant target through her iron sights, estimating range and wind conditions with the expertise her father had taught her during countless hours of practice. The defective rifle had no business attempting this shot, but she had committed to completing the exercise regardless of obstacles. Everything she had learned about marksmanship, mental discipline, and determination focused on this single moment. The range felt completely silent as Marines and officers alike watched Maria prepare for the most challenging shot of the day. Even casual conversations among range personnel stopped as everyone focused attention on the young Marine with the obviously defective rifle. The pressure was immense, but Maria had learned to thrive under pressure rather than succumb to it. Colonel Williams realized she was witnessing something special, a moment that would be remembered and discussed throughout the training community. Maria's performance was redefining what seemed possible under adverse conditions, demonstrating that individual competence could overcome institutional obstacles and equipment failures. Maria squeezed the trigger with perfect timing, sending the bullet on its long journey toward the distant target. The shot felt good leaving the barrel, and she instinctively knew it would find its mark despite the rifle's defects. Seconds passed before the confirmation ping echoed back across the range, bringing cheers and applause from Marines who had forgotten military protocol in their excitement. 46 successful hits out of 46 attempts. The scorecard showed numbers that seemed impossible given the weapon's condition, but dozens of witnesses had observed every shot. Maria had achieved a perfect score on one of the military's most challenging marksmanship exercises using equipment that should have made accurate shooting impossible. Sergeant Martinez approached Colonel Williams with the final scorecard, his expression showing amazement and professional admiration. "Ma'am, Staff Sergeant Santos achieved a 100% hit rate on all 46 targets attempted. I've been running this exercise for 8 years, and I've never seen performance like this with any equipment, let alone a defective rifle." Williams accepted the scorecard and studied the numbers with growing respect for Maria's accomplishment. The young Marine had not only overcome deliberate sabotage but had actually excelled beyond normal expectations in the process. This was exactly the kind of performance that defined truly exceptional Marines. One target remained in the exercise sequence. Target 47 was traditionally reserved for the most challenging shot of the day, a small precision target at extreme range that tested the absolute limits of marksmanship skill. Most Marines attempted this target knowing they would likely miss, treating it as a learning opportunity rather than an expected success. Maria knew that achieving a perfect exercise score would make her performance truly legendary, but she also understood that attempting target 47 with her defective rifle carried significant risk. Missing the final shot might diminish the impact of her previous successes, but she had committed to completing the entire exercise regardless of personal cost. The target appeared as a small dark circle against the distant hillside, barely visible through iron sights at such extreme range. Wind conditions had strengthened throughout the afternoon, adding another variable to an already complex shot. Maria studied the target carefully, calculating bullet drop, wind drift, and the additional complications created by her rifle's defects. Lieutenant Morrison watched with conflicted emotions as Maria prepared for the final shot. Part of him hoped she would miss, preserving some fragment of his original intentions. But, a larger part, the professional Marine who recognized exceptional competence when he saw it, wanted her to succeed. His planned lesson had evolved into something much more significant than he had ever intended. Maria settled into her firing position one final time, controlling her breathing and blocking out the distractions created by dozens of observers. The defective rifle felt familiar now, its quirks and limitations becoming tools she could use rather than obstacles to overcome. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, reminding her that good shooting was mostly mental preparation and only partially dependent on equipment quality. The shot that would complete her perfect performance lay ahead, waiting for the precise moment when wind conditions, breathing control, and weapon alignment would combine for success. Maria had come too far to accept anything less than her best effort on the final target. The defective rifle would either help her achieve something truly remarkable, or it would finally reveal the limitations that Lieutenant Morrison had always believed existed. The final target wavered in Maria's iron sights like a distant mirage, barely visible against the hillside backdrop at nearly 800 meters. This shot represented the culmination of everything she had learned about marksmanship, mental discipline, and overcoming impossible odds. The defective rifle that Lieutenant Morrison had intended as her downfall now felt like an extension of her will, its quirks and limitations transformed into familiar tools through determination and skill. Colonel Williams stood absolutely still, recognizing that she was witnessing a defining moment in one young Marine's career. Word of Maria's performance had already begun spreading through the base's communication networks, drawing additional observers who wanted to see the final shot in what was becoming a legendary demonstration of marksmanship excellence. Maria calculated wind conditions by observing grass movement at various distances between her position and the target. The afternoon breeze had intensified, creating complex air currents that would push any bullet off course without proper compensation. With functional optics, this shot would challenge even expert marksmen. With iron sights and a damaged rifle, it bordered on impossible. Lieutenant Morrison felt perspiration beading on his forehead despite the mild weather. 46 perfect hits had already destroyed any argument about female Marines lacking competence under pressure. If Maria succeeded with this final shot, her performance would become part of military folklore, inspiring generations of Marines while exposing his deliberate sabotage to potential investigation and disciplinary action. The range had fallen into unusual quiet as word spread about the perfect shooting exhibition in progress. Marines from other training areas had begun gathering at safe distances, drawn by stories of a female Marine achieving impossible accuracy with obviously defective equipment. The pressure on Maria's final shot had grown far beyond anything normally associated with a training exercise. Maria adjusted her breathing pattern to accommodate the extreme range and challenging wind conditions. Her father had taught her that the most difficult shots required extra patience, allowing natural body rhythms to settle into perfect harmony before attempting the trigger pull. Years of practice had ingrained these lessons so deeply that they operated below conscious thought, allowing her mind to focus entirely on the technical challenges ahead. Sergeant Martinez checked his spotting scope one final time, ensuring he could observe bullet impact and provide accurate feedback regardless of where the shot landed. In 8 years of conducting this exercise, he had never seen anyone attempt the final target with such confidence after already achieving a perfect score through 46 previous engagements. The mechanical target system cycled through its programmed routine, presenting the small precision circle for exactly 10 seconds before concealing it again behind protective barriers. Maria timed the system's rhythm during 2 complete cycles, identifying the optimal moment for engagement based on wind conditions and her breathing pattern. Corporal Chen watched his fellow Marine with profound admiration and growing awareness that he was witnessing something truly special. Maria's response to Lieutenant Morrison's sabotage had revealed character traits that went far beyond marksmanship skills. Her determination, adaptability, and refusal to be defeated by unfair circumstances embodied everything the Marine Corps claimed to represent. Colonel Williams found herself thinking about her own early military career and the obstacles she had faced as a female officer in what was traditionally a male-dominated profession. Maria's performance resonated on levels beyond simple marksmanship evaluation, demonstrating that competence and determination could overcome institutional prejudices and deliberate sabotage. The target appeared for its next cycle, and Maria began her final breathing sequence. She had committed to taking this shot during the upcoming presentation, gambling her perfect record on one last demonstration that proper training and mental discipline could overcome any obstacle. The defective rifle's familiar weight settled into her shoulder as she prepared to squeeze the trigger. Morrison realized that regardless of whether Maria hit or missed the final target, her overall performance had fundamentally changed his understanding of female capabilities in combat roles. 46 consecutive hits with sabotaged equipment couldn't be dismissed as luck or favorable conditions. This was skill and determination operating at the highest levels he had ever witnessed. Wind conditions shifted slightly as Maria acquired the target through her iron sights. She adjusted her aim point to compensate, drawing on years of experience reading environmental factors that affected bullet flight. The shot required perfect timing, precise calculation, and absolute confidence in her ability to make the defective rifle perform beyond its apparent limitations. The target began another cycle, and Maria controlled her breathing as she had been taught since childhood. Her heartbeat slowed to a steady rhythm that would provide natural pause points for the trigger pull. Everything she had learned about marksmanship, everything her father had taught her about mental preparation, and everything her military training had instilled about performing under pressure combined in this single moment. Maria squeezed the trigger during the perfect pause between heartbeats, sending her final bullet toward the distant target. The shot felt clean despite the rifle's irregular mechanism, and she knew instinctively that her calculations and timing had been correct. The bullet would either find its mark or miss due to factors beyond her control, but she had given her absolute best effort. Seconds stretched into what felt like minutes as the bullet traveled its long arc toward the hillside target. Everyone present understood they were witnessing either the completion of a perfect exercise or a near miss that would still represent extraordinary achievement under impossible circumstances. The outcome would define how this day was remembered in military training circles. The confirmation ping echoed across the range with crystal clarity, followed immediately by cheers and applause from Marines who had forgotten all military protocol in their excitement. Target 47 had fallen to Maria's final shot, completing a perfect 47 for 47 performance that seemed impossible given the equipment she had been forced to use. Sergeant Martinez consulted his spotting scope and shook his head in amazement before announcing the results. Perfect center hit on target 47. Staff Sergeant Santos has achieved a 100% success rate on all 47 targets in today's exercise. The gathered Marines erupted in sustained applause that seemed inappropriate for a military training environment but perfectly fitting for what they had witnessed. Maria had not only overcome Lieutenant Morrison's sabotage but had actually exceeded the highest standards anyone thought possible under such circumstances. Colonel Williams approached Maria directly, her expression showing admiration and professional respect. Staff Sergeant Santos, that was the most impressive display of marksmanship I've witnessed in 25 years of military service. Your performance today will be remembered and discussed for years to come. Maria stood at attention, still holding the defective rifle that had become the instrument of her triumph. Thank you, ma'am. Just doing my job to the best of my ability with available equipment. Williams turned to Lieutenant Morrison with an expression that promised serious consequences for his role in providing defective equipment. Lieutenant, we need to discuss proper equipment management procedures immediately after this exercise concludes. What happened here today raises questions that require thorough investigation. Morrison realized that his attempt to prove female limitations had instead highlighted institutional problems that could affect his own career prospects. Maria's success with deliberately sabotaged equipment would inevitably lead to questions about how such equipment reached a qualification exercise and who was responsible for the obvious safety violations involved. As Marines began clearing the range and securing equipment, stories of Maria's perfect performance spread throughout the base with remarkable speed. Her achievement would become part of Camp Pendleton folklore, inspiring future generations of Marines while serving as a powerful example of individual excellence overcoming institutional obstacles. Maria carefully cleaned and secured the defective rifle that had carried her to an unprecedented perfect score. The weapon that Lieutenant Morrison intended as proof of her limitations had instead become the foundation for a demonstration of competence and determination that exceeded everyone's expectations. Colonel Williams made notes for her official report, knowing that Maria's performance would result in commendations, promotion opportunities, and probably assignment to elite training programs that could define the trajectory of an exceptional military career. The young Marine had earned recognition through pure merit and determination rather than political considerations or accommodation. In the weeks that followed, Maria's story would spread throughout the military training community, inspiring countless Marines and challenging assumptions about gender roles in combat positions. Lieutenant Morrison faced administrative action for providing defective equipment and deliberately compromising a qualification exercise, while Maria received assignment to advanced sniper training programs where her skills could be developed to their full potential. The defective rifle was eventually retired from service, but not before becoming something of a legend itself among Marines who understood the full story of how one determined woman had transformed intentional sabotage into the foundation for perfect performance. Maria's 47 consecutive hits would stand as a testament to the power of individual excellence over institutional prejudice, proving that competence and determination could overcome any obstacle placed in their path.